Hi, Bree. I'm so glad to have you here today. We are here today with Bree Hodges from Learner Centered Collaborative. We chose to have Bree on the podcast today to talk specifically about leaders and how we can support our leaders as they shift towards learner-centered learning and education. Specifically, we're going to dive in today about leadership coaching and the impact of communication and narrative. Welcome, Bree.
Hey, super excited to be here today and to enjoy your companionship and collaboration as we dive into this incredible, important topic to me. So hopefully it'll be to you all as well.
Great. Well, let's kick it off by learning a little bit about who you are, how you came to this work, and what is your role now at Learner Center Collaborative.
Awesome. Well, I am Bree Hodges. I am a Director of Strategic Partnerships here at the Learner Centered Collaborative. And I always start these out by saying I'm from Texas because everybody always asks at some point in time, where's that drawl come from? And quick background for me is classroom teacher, specifically at the middle and high school level for English, turned and was an athletic coach, then turned instructional coach, then turned district administrator for digital learning as well as professional learning, community engagement and stakeholder engagement. And then that moved into working across the country as people started asking, how did you do all of this work with at your district? What did that look like? And so, the short and dirty of that is that I am a learner and a storyteller, and I have found a way to bring those two things together in order to help create change for our education and our education systems across the country. That said, I got here at LCC because of that exact work of working across the country, working with these leaders, with these school systems, with these teachers of what does this look like? How can we make change happen? It's pretty hard for everybody who's involved in this work to travel across the country. And so we kind of need to harken back to the old days where we would have the people who would read the stories and tell what was happening across the country.
Yeah.
That's kind of my role, is I get to go in, learn about all of these different things, and then share that with other organizations and districts across. So it's been really, really fun. And hopefully we're going to keep on making that happen.
Yeah, I love that. I love thinking of our work as storytelling. Katie often refers to them as bright spots. You're a storyteller, but it really is getting into our schools, getting into classrooms, seeing the amazing things that are happening, and then spreading the word. Yeah, that's amazing. I also didn't know you were an athletic director, which makes so much sense of how you're always pumping us all up. And so that makes so much sense to me now. Well, one question I am asking all of our guests, and I'd love to hear your answer, is your why of learner-centered. We're pretty committed to this buzzword of learner-centered, but I want to know your why. Why do you think this is the way forward in education? What's important to you about putting learners at the center?
Love this question. So I love to say that learners of all ages and stages, whether it's pre-K to grade, are integral to education, right? Like we don't age out of learning. This is not something that is specific to students. And we'll save this for a different podcast because Lord knows I can get super fired up about it. But it's not even separating pedagogy to andragogy or any of that kind of stuff. It's truly all of us are learners. I have learned a ton from little kids, right? That have totally different experiences than I have had, that have so much to teach me and things that I have never even imagined. And so there's no age limit there. The big part of what all of that means is, Ralph Ellison says it best when he says, I am my experiences and my experiences are me. And so my why is, when I think about learning, I think about the goal of learning is to take something that I'm not familiar with, something that I want to understand in a better level, and I need to make that my own, and I need to bring that into my own experiences. And so being able to take this work and break it down by individual in order to say, this is what was interesting to you. This is the strength that you bring to this. This is the new take that you've shared with it. Now it's become a fabric of your story. And now it becomes the fabric of our culture and the fabric of our system. And so I think that is what is most important, right? There's no canned curriculum. There's no specific strategy. There's no specific resource that has to be used in order to do this. Our resources are our people and our stories and our aspirations and what we want to do from that point forward. And so I love this work that we actually get to see and hear the people that are impacted by our thoughts and by our actions the most.
Wow, that's really impactful. And yeah, you say it so beautifully. And I know it's firing me up. So thank you for sharing your why. All right, let's dive into leadership. Let's dive into how we support our leaders. Where I want to start actually, Bree, is just breaking down some of the things that you've shared with me that you want to talk through, which is leaders, communication, and narrative. So when you say leaders, when we refer to shifting education or change, who are you talking about? Who are these leaders?
I think just like learners, right? Leaders are not built and bound by a title or a business card. So we have student leaders, we have classroom leaders, we have community leaders, we have teacher leaders, we have leaders that have the paycheck and the title to go with it, right? Like it all depends upon the circumstance and the situation. And so it's one of those where it's a little bit hard to define. Are you committed to this work, and are you willing to bring your best foot forward in it? And if so, then that makes you a leader in my book. And so how can we help you lean into this work and make that, bring it forward? That said, there's in our systems, we have certain groups that we often find ourselves placed in. And so, and we know that when we're looking at change can happen at any point in place, but there's also systematic change that we need to make sure that we're bringing the right players in at the right point of the game, right? So everybody's going to be a player, but we might have certain times when we're going to facilitate a point of change by using a specific group of players in order to do that.
And what I really love about your style, I know that you shared that you're a storyteller, and I know that communication and storytelling and narrative is really close to your heart in the way that you coach, in the way that you support leaders. What does that mean to you? What's the power in that?
I think first and foremost, we talk all the time at LCC about the importance of our why and using that why as our North Star, because it's going to shine the lights to the places that we need to go. And that's super important, and I love to tell our friends that, when you know your why, you can defend and you can support anything, right? Without that why, it's almost impossible to do those two pieces. And especially when you're in a leadership role, you're going to find yourself doing one of those two things. You're either defending it or you're supporting why we're doing this work. And when it comes to explaining that, our human brains process and hold on to and understand the world around us through story. And I'm not talking about once upon a time, guided picture book story. I'm talking about explaining our experiences, talking through, bringing examples of our students who are impacted by this work, or and for good or for not, right? Like it's always easy to point to this is this great thing that's happening for this one particular student. But how much power is also in and this student was left out of that experience. How can we, bring them in? How can we include them in? And so, I started off our conversation by saying, sharing a little bit of my transition through education. And one of the things that happened in my particular district, at the time, we were achieving a lot of success with an implementation of digital learning, of going one-to-one. And people would always ask, like, how were you able to get this buy-in? And it wasn't getting buy-in; it was connecting stories to purpose and making sure that we understand every person has a why. Every person has a what, and every person has a how, and we have a where, right? And so if we can bring those things together and knit them into a tapestry of story, then we're able to really engage our stakeholders and bring them in. Like I said, we're talking about this big, how can we position our teams to be best to deliver the information and to connect that information where they need to be. And so I think so many times as leaders, we have a tendency to discount story because number one, we think there's one story and there's not. There's a million of them out there. And actually the best stories are the small stories that we think might not be really celebrated. Those are the most powerful stories. And then the second part of that is understanding how that story connects into communication. Our dear friend and colleague, Devin always talks about when we're talking about relational trust that we've got to have consistency in our messaging, but he's very quick to point out that we're not saying you say the same thing over and over again. What we're saying is that you take that message and you apply it appropriately and can talk through that based upon the people that you're talking through. And so I think that's one of those pieces that we forget about in communication because we think like, yep, sent it as an email, now I'm done and I can walk out. But instead, like, how are we continuing that conversation through the stories to make sure that we bring that in purposefully with our people?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And like you said, you're out in the field, Bree. You're popping in and out of classrooms. You're meeting with leaders, student leaders, classroom leaders, district leaders. I know for me, I always love to hear how this is applied. How does this really show up in our schools? Do you have anyone in mind that you feel like is modeling, elevating those small stories? Do you feel like you want to, there's someone that you'd like to share about that's doing this work deeply?
Absolutely. So I could literally spend all of our time doing this. So it's a little bit hard to choose and to narrow down, but I want to give a huge shout out to Mineola Public Schools in Mineola, New York, Superintendent Mike Nagler. They do a fantastic job of surfacing the stories that are happening across the board. And the other part that, in addition to sharing out the stories, they do a great job of seeking the stories that are happening. And what I mean by that is, Mineola is a pretty, it's very comfortable for me, right? It's a small town. It's a small school system. And what happens when we find ourselves in these smaller towns and these smaller school systems is that we have a tendency to believe like, oh, I already know what they're going to say. We can predict what's, we can predict where the challenges and the opportunities are going to be, or what the mindsets are going to be. And I applaud Mineola and their team because they still take time to meet with stakeholders, to hold empathy interviews, to reach out to people and make sure, including students and their families, to find out when are we at our best? What does this look like? How can we make sure that this experience is happening repeatedly and continually for everyone? And how can it look different so that it's not just a cookie cutter experience to try to create a cookie cutter world? Instead, it's this like, we want to build on these emotions. We want to build on these aspirations and these opportunities. And we know that each one of you brings something different to that. And so how can we expand our inventory of experiences that kids and adults and families and our entire community can experience. So I love and appreciate that about them. Again, it's one thing where we have a tendency as leaders to wait for the story to happen. It's another thing to actively go and seek those stories in order to make sure that you are showcasing and sharing and recognizing, not just for others, but for yourself, the specialness that is your system. So I definitely want to give a shout to them for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing about Mineola. They are an amazing partner of ours. And Bree, I just want to thank you for all that you've shared about coaching leaders, the power of story, the power of communication and narrative. I know that you always inspire me, and that's why I get excited to share your story more broadly. So, is there anything else you'd like to share as we close this out?
No, number one, thank you so much for this opportunity to share a little bit of my passion with everybody. And I my big ask across for everybody who's listening is share your stories. Tell us what's happening. I think that that's one of the biggest pieces. You know, the number one question that leaders always ask is what else is out there? What is happening? What is, what's going on that we can bring back into our into our world? And we don't know that if we don't know the stories. And so taking the time to seek out those stories both internally and externally, and then sharing those with the world. Everybody's got some magic, and we all benefit whenever we get those stories out there. So that would be my big for you today.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. We all do have magic, and we just have to get out there and hear the stories and share them more broadly. So, Bree, always a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you so much, and I cannot wait to see where this goes.